Hello, my name is Claire Silva, and welcome to my basic grant writing webinar. Grant writing can be easy if you are organized and know what you are doing. In this session, I will help you learn everything you need to know about basic grants, which are applications to local foundations. I will also give you some hints of what is needed for the intermediate and advanced levels of grant writing for state and federal proposals. After working in human services for many years, my career shifted to writing and administering grants. For over 13 years, I wrote local, state, and federal grants ranging from $500 to several $1,000,000 with a success rate of over 80%. As the executive director and sole grant writer of a nonprofit agency, I wrote and received $5.9 million in grants. I've also served as a federal grant reviewer for 4 departments, and I reviewed and scored over 31 million in national grant applications. I became interested in grants early in my career when I was working with homeless, runaway, and gang-involved teenagers and low-income families. I quickly learned the importance of gathering data and having realistic and attainable goals for programs. I realized I wanted to be the person who was developing and designing the programs. Soon after that, I had to write a couple paragraphs about the work we were doing for upcoming grants, and that is how my career in grant writing began. I created this webinar to help people understand grants and learn how to write them. This is one-stop shopping. You'll get everything you need in a user-friendly format. For the first 30 minutes, I will explain things to you. You can sit back, listen, and absorb the information. During the last 30 minutes, I will let you know when it's time to start taking notes. At that point, I will lead you through several action steps for grant writing and grant management. I've divided the webinar into 3 learning objectives. You will learn general information about grants so you understand terms and the process. We'll cover the philosophy and skills needed to be successful and shortcuts to save you time and energy. By the end of the session, I will give you concrete examples for action steps. This is where I will teach you exactly what you need to do to get ready and to start writing. The general information section will give you an overview about grants so you understand them from start to finish. We will review the basics such as the one word that sums up all grants, where you can search for and how you can find grants, which organizations are eligible to apply, what the typical life cycle or grant process looks like, how long a grant normally takes to write and put together, and what the typical time frame is to hear if a proposal is awarded or rejected. In the philosophy, skills, and shortcuts section, I will help you understand the mindset and philosophy needed as you are writing grants. We'll review the skills and strengths a grant writer needs to be successful, the 3 main questions you need to think about as you write, and how to balance your answers. I will share a secret with you which I feel is the most important concept. We'll discuss what you can expect during and after, mistakes you do not want to make, and hints I've learned as a writer and an evaluator. The last part of the webinar is about the action steps. I'll explain several documents and tell you what items to gather and develop before you start looking at potential grants. I'll show you how to create and build your own development plan. I'll teach you quick things to look for in the instructions and priority items to work on first. You'll learn what you need to have in your proposal to be successful, and once you've received grants, how to secure continued funding. What is a grant? Most people think of a grant as everything that is listed here. Yes, a grant is definitely all of those words and many others. But the most important word to describe a grant is relationship. A grant is a relationship between a funder and an agency or business. The relationship is started, grows, and builds with ongoing performance, and if done correctly, a relationship may provide continued funding. The main goal is to create a solid relationship with the funder. Of course, a written application is important, but an application is only half of a grant. The other half is the relationship that you build with a funder. This is a true story. Years ago, I went to an event for nonprofits, and several foundations were seated in different sections throughout the room. As each foundation was called, the representative stood up, took a couple minutes to introduce themselves to the audience, and explain the types of programs or projects they were interested in financially supporting. I looked around and knew each of them, but there was one foundation I did not have a relationship with. At the break, I went over to the woman, introduced myself, handed my business card, and told her about the work we did. A few weeks later, she called me and told me to apply for one of their grants. The application was an easy fill-in form that took about a half an hour to finish. We received $10,000 from that one handshake. It was as easy as that. Before we get too far into grants, I want to stress an important point. Grants definitely contribute to an agency's success, but they cannot be the only source of funding. In addition to grants, a financially healthy agency or business generates income from a product or services, creates connections with corporate donors and faith-based organizations, develops relationships with private donors and generates bequests or endowments, and holds special fundraising events. Fundraising efforts should include mass marketing, that is online and direct mail, a strong online presence through a website and social media outlets, and other supports such as in-kind donations. Ideally, the board of directors should be strong stewards of the agency and be committed to and able to raise at least 10% of the annual budget through their connections with small businesses, corporations, and individual donors and stakeholders. This list shows the types of organizations that can receive grant funding. Most grants are for nonprofit agencies that have a 501c3 determination letter from the IRS, which states it is recognized as exempt from federal income taxation. So how do you know which entities are eligible to apply? You need to read the instructions thoroughly to find an explanation of eligible organizations. The funder may also have more detailed instructions listed on their website. A big question people have is how to find grants. Most local banks and credit unions have foundations which will usually post their grant announcements on their website or social media. When you are first starting out with writing grants, you want to approach local foundations that are located in your region. State and federal grants are a little different. One way to learn about those grant opportunities is to visit the department's website and subscribe to receive their email notifications. A great way to find grants is through an online database. Libraries will sometimes have a membership in an online system. You can call around to local libraries to ask who has a membership available for public use. Using the database, you can search for keywords about the types of services you provide, and available grants will appear. Another way to learn about grants is through networking events, and grants.gov is a website to find federal grants. For most grants, the life cycle starts with building a relationship with a funder. A funder can be a foundation, business, or department that is giving the money. An agency submits an application, and if the proposal is accepted, a grant award is given and the recipient implements the program or project. Most funders will want a final report. The last stage is promoting the success of the program while acknowledging the funder. If done properly, a relationship with a funder can be ongoing. I've mentioned the word instructions, but you will not see instructions for grants. You will see different acronyms: an RFP, request for proposals, an RFA, request for applications, a NOFA, notice of funding availability, or a NOFO, notice of funding opportunity. Usually an RFP or RFA is for local and state funding, and a NOFA or NOFO is for federal funding. I will use the term RFP for the rest of the presentation. It is a set of instructions that you must follow. Your first few grants will take more time to write than most other grants, since it is the first time you are formulating answers to questions. If you have already gathered all of the documents that we will discuss in the final section, a good estimate is 5 hours to complete most basic grants. Large state and federal grants can easily take a month and a half working full-time. For some local grants, you will breeze through the application in 30 minutes because they ask for minimal information. Ideally, you will hear back about most grant applications within 3 months. Some funders may wait 6 months or much longer, and for some, you may never get a response. You want to save all correspondence with funders, the good news and the bad news. When you receive many grants, it can get confusing, so you want to save the award letters. If your application is rejected and they give feedback, save that for your records since it is valuable information. A question you may have is, do I need to have a college degree to be a grant writer? No, a college degree is not necessary to get started. However, as you build your grant writing business, you may find that you want or need a degree to increase your credibility. College helps students develop research skills, study habits, juggle several tasks simultaneously, time management, and the ability to quickly prioritize. Those are the same skills you need to be successful at grant writing. If you are thinking about a career and wondering, is grant writing for me? Or if you are relatively new to grant writing and hoping to improve your knowledge and abilities, there are key skills and strengths you need to have. The following list provides key skills and strengths you need at the basic level. I've also included abilities you will need for the intermediate and advanced levels, so as your skills increase, you can challenge yourself and move on to state and federal grants. Grant writers understand they are competing with others and need to get the most points possible. They are organized, thorough, and great at details and documentation. Of course, some rejections are a little upsetting, and each grant is a gamble. You can't take rejection personally. You just need to move on to the next application. Grant deadlines are strict and non-negotiable, and it is rare for a due date to be extended. And a grant writer needs to be able to handle large amounts of stress. A good grant writer can read through the RFP, understand what the funder is looking for, and is then able to answer the questions. For local grants, there is not a lot of research, maybe just one local statistic from a recent newspaper article. Writing and budgeting skills are essential. Research and creating charts and graphs is more important at the state and federal levels. A grant writer needs to be able to juggle many moving and changing pieces and know how to prioritize them. If you like creating, envisioning, or planning, that is a perfect mindset to have when writing a grant. Influencing how others view an agency's work is a big part of grant writing. How you write will sell your idea or plan. Do you believe in what you are writing about? Are you passionate about the program or services provided by the agency? Networking will help you get grants, and building collaborations is needed for state and federal grants and may be useful for local grants too. Grant writing is a learned skill that takes a lot of practice. No grant writer starts off and gets 100% of the grants they write. When you are first starting out, you want to save everything you write in a Word document. Things like the mission statement and history of the agency will probably not change that often. Keeping them in a Word document allows you to copy and paste into other applications. You want to save all budgets in Excel spreadsheets and revise as needed. Since most grants are available to nonprofits, to build your skills and gain experience, you may want to volunteer for a local nonprofit agency that has been in business for 2 or more years. Most nonprofits would be thrilled to have a volunteer helping them with grants. You can volunteer, write a couple small grants for them, and increase your skills, confidence, and experience. If you do a great job, it could potentially turn into a contract or a part-time or full-time position. Usually people need to write a number of grants before they develop their own pattern. For me, since I was normally writing several grants around the same time, I figured out certain things I worked on first to help me save time. I will share those secrets with you a bit further into the webinar when we get into time-saving tips. When developing your own pattern, pay attention to what makes you lose time versus what helps you be more focused, organized, and save time. Larger organizations have a team approach to writing grants. One person may have the ideas for what the project or program should do and how it should be implemented. Another person may be in charge of assembling the documents needed or writing the actual answers in the application, and another may develop the budget. If you have a team that will work on grants together, it is important to identify who will be responsible for each part and what the completion time should be. Grants need to answer 3 basic questions. What problem in the community will you be addressing? If you are awarded the funding, what specifically will you do to help solve that problem? As in, what program, project, or services will you provide? And why should the funder give money to your organization instead of giving it to another? The RFP may not ask these questions specifically, but those are the three concepts reviewers are contemplating as they review the applications. As you write to answer those three basic questions, your grant application also needs to be a balancing act. First, the problem your program will address needs to be a cause or giving area that the funder is interested in supporting. You want to state the problem, but not make it too overwhelming or hopeless. You want to state you have the solution and make it realistic. And you want to demonstrate that your agency's prior experience and abilities are the best to get the work done. Here's a secret. It's the most important concept, and it is something I want you to keep in mind as you write a grant. Ideally, you should write goals that are realistic and completely within reach. And ideally, when your agency implements the program, you want to exceed those goals. So the most important concept is to write goals you know your agency will not only be able to meet, but will also be able to exceed. It's a guaranteed win-win for your agency and the funder. You never want to write a grant that overpromises or underperform for a grant that has been awarded. Overpromising will either guarantee you don't get the funding, or your agency's inability to meet the goals will quickly destroy a relationship with a funder. Most grant reviewers are chosen because they are knowledgeable about the types of programs or services local agencies provide. They will instantly spot if the goals you list in the application are unrealistic or overpromising. You want to over-deliver, not over-promise. This is a true story. Early in my career, I took a job as an executive director and led a nonprofit agency that was not doing well financially and was about to close its doors. The previous grant writer wrote a grant stating the homeless clients were going to have computers, each building was going to have computers, and the clients were going to serve on all the local nonprofit boards. At the time, the staff didn't even have computers. Yes, I would have loved to keep that grant since the agency couldn't pay its bills, but accepting it would have been lying that we could accomplish what I knew was not true. Plus, the money didn't make sense. The grant was not going to pay for the computers for the clients or the buildings. It was to fund something else. So why accept a grant that would make the agency go further into debt? I contacted the funder, explained the situation, and stated we could not accept the award. The goals and program or services that you state you will accomplish in the grant application is a promise. It is important to be honest. If you get the grant and find you cannot meet what you said you were going to do, it is important to inform the funder right away. Funders want to know what progress you are making, if there are any obstacles, and what you are doing to overcome those hurdles. They may even have ideas of how you can adjust or tweak your program. I wrote and received a $1.75 million grant to provide outreach services to homeless women, including several different minority groups. One of those groups was the Chinese community. Outreach was provided in Mandarin and Cantonese. I hired a street outreach worker, ran ads in the local Chinese newspaper, and had signs. But we could only reach a few clients. I was disappointed and notified the funder that we could not reach our goal. What surprised me was the funder knew the target population would be difficult to engage and was thrilled with the efforts and progress we had made. They offered extra training, encouraged us to revise the outreach a bit, and the support was very helpful. In the end, they were so happy with our work that they showcased our program with huge displays in the lobby of one of the government buildings, so all federal employees would see it as they made their way to their offices each morning. So why do we not want to overpromise or underdeliver? And why would we tell a funder if we were struggling to meet the goals we promised? Because we want the funder to know they can trust us. As with any relationship, trust is the key. The funder needs to feel secure knowing that the agency is honest, will deliver on every goal that was listed in the application, and if not able to meet the goals, the funder knows the agency did their best. I want to give you a glimpse of what it's like being a grant reviewer. In the past, grant applications were mailed or submitted by dropping off a packet. It would then be in a pile with many other applications. Now, most applications are submitted online, which is easier for the grant writer, but it means the funder will probably receive many more applications than in the past. With limited dollars to give, it is stressful for reviewers to make final decisions of who should receive funding. Once received, your application will be shared electronically or given as printed packets to a group of people who will review the applications. Ideally, the reviewers are given a scoring system to determine which grants should be funded. If a funder is interested but needs some clarification or some changes to your application, there may be a negotiation period before an award is made, and they could potentially ask if you could still implement the program with less money. This is an example of the negotiation period. I had written a grant to fund a recovery housing program for women. The program did not allow any drug or alcohol use. I was contacted that we were one of the 2 agencies in the state that was potentially receiving a grant, but the funder wanted to meet in person to discuss the proposal. They asked if we could accept women who were on methadone. As an agency, we were able to make that change. The grant was awarded and continued for many years. If a grant is accepted, you will usually receive an award letter or email. Some funders will also expect an agreement or contract to be signed and returned before they send the funds. The funder will typically want to announce that they funded the project. They may send a press release to the local newspapers, or they may post information on their website or social media platforms. Your agency will then want to post the funder's announcement through your social media outlets. There'll be plenty of slides on what to do, so I want to focus on things not to do. Don't chase money. Many times businesses get desperate for money and they chase after any grants they can, which may not be in line with their mission. This weakens the agency and confuses funders. Don't apply just to apply. Your application is your agency's reputation. If you send in a poorly written application, it shows. Don't rush. You want to impress the reviewers, not disappoint or scare them. As you write a grant, remember you are writing for the people who will review your application. Is your project interesting? Is it compelling? Put yourself in the reviewer's shoes. Did you explain everything in a clear manner? Did you give too much information? The last thing you want to do is bore the reviewers. The RFP is the format you want to follow. Adding more is not good. Anything other than their format or attachments that were not requested can disqualify you. Keep in mind, reviewers are trying to get the biggest bang for their buck, and they may be looking at the cost per client. If you request $5,000 to work with 10 children, your application may not compare well with an agency requesting $5,000 to work with 100 children. Or maybe the funder is looking for a more intensive program to serve a smaller number of people. If the funder advertises how many people have been served by other programs they have supported, they care about cost per client. Another thing to consider is your overall presentation. Besides getting things in on time and giving everything the funder asks for, is it written well? Are you submitting something that is easy to understand, organized, and professionally put together? Do your attachments agree with what you listed in the narrative? Each time I was serving as a federal reviewer and scoring applications from across the country, I could easily spot who hired a professional grant writer and who didn't. A key to successful grant writing and being able to write several grants per month is making sure you have enough time. In the next few slides, I give you some of the strategies I use. The first thing I look for is the funder's priorities and ineligible activities, which are usually listed on their website or in the RFP. If the program or services I am seeking funding for is in line with their priorities, I stay interested. If the project is similar to their ineligible activities, I move on to a different opportunity. Once you've decided that your project is in line with the funder's priorities, the next thing you want to do is read the entire RFP before you start doing any work. I normally print it out and jot down notes as I start to formulate ideas in my head. Most local grants have an RFP that is a few pages, so within a few minutes you can read through and start strategizing. State and federal RFPs are more involved and can easily be over 40 pages long. For those, I normally use sticky notes to mark specific sections. Some grants require a letter of intent before you can apply. A letter of intent is a brief one-page letter on your agency's letterhead that gets submitted to the foundation. In your request for their funds, you are writing a mini proposal. The 3 questions I mentioned earlier need to be answered: why you need the funds, what you will do with the money if awarded, and why your agency is the best. If they like your proposal, you will then be invited to submit a full application. The top 3 things I look for in an RFP are the due date, is the agency eligible to apply, and is there a matching funds requirement. If the agency is eligible to apply, I then set a goal for myself to finish and submit the grant 2 to 3 days before it is due. Matching funds normally applies to state or federal grants. Some grants require a 25% match or more, which means for every dollar they give, your agency needs to contribute that specific percent as direct, indirect, or in kind. Direct costs are expenses that allow you to provide the program or services. Indirect costs are the expenses that support the program behind the scenes, and in kind is a voluntary or free contribution. An example is an after-school program to teach teenagers a foreign language. The teacher and program supplies are direct costs. The insurance for the building could be an indirect cost. A mom volunteers and speaks to the kids in her language, which would be an in-kind contribution. The last thing I look for in the RFP is if a contact person is listed. If one is listed, I check if it encourages questions. If it looks like they want potential applicants reaching out to the contact person, you definitely want to do that. Once you've formulated your grant proposal in your head, call the contact person, introduce yourself, explain the potential project, and ask if they would consider funding it. If the RFP does not encourage questions, do not contact anyone before submitting an application. Whatever the due date, always plan that you want to be done with the grant at least 2 to 3 days before it is due. You always want to start sooner than later. Also, you want to be ready for the unexpected. Almost every time I was working on a large state or federal grant, one of the printers would stop working. I always made sure I had 2 or 3 printers with scanners that were easily accessible. For local grants, you will usually need a printer and a scanner. Make sure it is ready to go. I am a very honest and transparent person, but if you need things from other people, such as a signed application or a budget or a chart or graph, you need to fib a little for when the grant is due. If you tell them the true date the grant is due, they will return the documents on that date. They don't understand or realize you need time to assemble the grant and explain the document they are providing. Never tell others when the grant is due. Tell them the date you need the items returned by. Another time-related item I look for is who needs to sign the application. When I was the executive director of a nonprofit agency, I signed all the grant applications that I wrote, so it was easy. I wasn't losing any time getting signatures. But if I needed the board president or treasurer to sign the application, that would take up more time, and I needed to plan for it. Some applications also require a notarized form, which can potentially make you lose days. Sometimes grant opportunities appear and are due right away. While the money and potential to implement a new program sound exciting, you do not want to set yourself up for a heart attack or waste time on grants that are unrealistic to put together, and you never want to throw together a poorly written application. You have to evaluate the situation and be honest with yourself. Do you realistically have enough time to write the grant? If you know you don't have enough time, don't apply. Now we will discuss the actual parts of a grant. The first part is the application. Most local funders will provide a form that needs to be completed, or it may be an online system where you input your answers. Usually the application will consist of questions such as who the contact person is, usually the executive director, the amount of money being requested, information about the agency and the target population, and specific information about the program or services you plan to provide. A state or federal grant does not usually have an application form. Instead, there is a large section called the narrative. For the large grants, the narrative section can easily have 10 to 20 tough questions that need to be answered. For local grants, the narrative section is usually incorporated into the application form and consists of a couple questions such as the mission, history, and accomplishments. The funder may also request an agency budget, a budget for the program, and other funding sources. Since most funders have an online application where you upload specific documents, you usually don't need to worry about any order to arrange the attachments. For funders who want a paper application or a PDF copy of the entire application, The RFP will usually list the order in which they want all the documents submitted. If no specific order is listed, the first few pages should be a cover letter, then the application, which is followed by the documents in the same order they were mentioned in the RFP. Here is a chart of the items you will need to gather before you begin writing a grant. Everything with a white background is needed for your local grant applications, and I've grayed out items that are needed for the state and federal grants. If the agency has never applied for grants, you will have a lot of work ahead of you trying to track down documents or creating them. We will review each item in detail in the next few slides, and I will give you examples so it is easier to understand. Collecting or creating everything before you start writing grants will save you time, energy, and a lot of headache. And having the documents readily available will make you faster at applying, which allows you to work on more applications. I want you to become familiar with each document and ultimately be able to find or create it. For the rest of the webinar, I've made up a pretend company called ABC Incorporated, Abilities Build Community, and pretend programs we will use as examples. We've come to the part you've been waiting for. It is time to stop, get yourself organized, and get ready to take notes. In the next set of slides, I will discuss each item I want you to gather. Some of the items will be easy to find and straightforward. Others may take a little longer to find, and you may have to ask the executive director or a board member for help. You will probably need to create several documents. Ideally, you should keep digital copies of each of the documents we will review. Probably the easiest item to gather is the contact information for the authorized representative of the agency. This person is usually the executive director. If it is a small nonprofit that doesn't have staff, the authorized representative may be the chair or president of the board of directors. Find out who the authorized representative would be, and then make sure you have his or her formal name, title, mailing address, phone number, fax number, and email address. The next item is the agency's mission statement. Ideally, the current mission statement is on the agency's website. It is normally a brief sentence or phrase that quickly lets others know what the agency is committed to for its work, values, and goals. In case the mission may be changing soon, you want to know when is the last time the board of directors reviewed the mission statement, and is the board scheduled to do any strategic planning soon, which could possibly change the mission statement. You will see the words mission or mission statement interchangeably in RFPs. Here is an example of the mission statement for my pretend company, ABC Incorporated. The mission is to increase literacy and transform the lives of at-risk teenagers through community partnerships. Many mission statements start with the word to. It's a brief action statement that is easy to remember, states the purpose of the organization, and gives a quick summary of what the company values and strives for. If a brief history is not on the agency's website or not available, write a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph about the history of the organization. When did the agency begin? And if it is important to the current mission, how did the agency start? What year did it incorporate? Where is it located? Where and for whom are services provided? What types of services are provided? If the agency has several different programs, you may want to include when each of those programs began. Here is an example of an agency's history. I list who formed the agency, when it began and how it began, and when it became incorporated. I've also included an overview sentence about the number of programs the agency provides. Most applications that are online will limit how many words you can use for each answer. So a few sentences as the agency's history is usually plenty of information to start. If the funder offers more space, then you can provide more information. As the grant writer, you can ask the executive director for a list of accomplishments. If he or she doesn't have a list, you want to learn about the programs and then write short paragraphs about each. The paragraph should give a brief overview and description of the services provided while highlighting the accomplishments. The accomplishments should focus on the results or outcomes of the program and need to be measurable, which means you give numbers or percentages. This is an example of the types of paragraphs I would write about each of the agency's programs before I apply for a grant. As an RFP becomes available, I would fix the number in the last sentence which is bold and underlined, with the most up-to-date numbers of people served. Then I can copy and paste the paragraph or paragraphs into the application. If an RFP allows enough space and is asking for the agency accomplishments, I can copy and paste all of the paragraphs. Your mission statement, history about the organization, and accomplishments are all considered part of the narrative, and local grant applications may ask two more narrative questions, which are the target population and the purpose. The target population is the total number of clients to be served. Some grants may just want a total number. Other grants may want more information, such as the city or area where you will find the clients. The purpose is your overall goal of the program. Most of the time, local grants do not request goals and objectives, but it is always needed for state and federal grants. In case a funder requests it, here is an example of goals and objectives for the HIRE program. Each of the objectives can potentially be a source of data, also known as an outcome measurement. One thing to keep in mind is, if I submitted this in a grant application and it was funded, how would I keep track of the data to later include in a report to the funder? Well, before you start writing grants, you want to make sure the agency has a way to keep track of the data. Most agencies will have some sort of software for tracking results of the programs, but if the agency does not have a system in place, Excel is the best program for crunching numbers, and Access can be very useful for tracking clients, their demographic information, progress in the program, and outcomes. I normally build an Access database to track the program data I need. In the accomplishments example I gave, I wrote that hundreds of students and senior citizens had participated in the 3 different programs. If a funder wanted to visit any of the programs, which is called a site visit, they have the right to study how we are collecting the data to prove the numbers we have claimed and make sure everything stated in the grant application is actually happening. This is why a database is important to track and quickly provide and prove all the data. Another narrative question that is not very common but you may see is the program's timeline. In this example, I've listed the main activities for the HIRE program and when they will happen during the upcoming year. The pattern does not need to be in any format. You want to create a chart that is easy to read and understand. The reader should be able to look and quickly get an idea of what you will be doing in the program, by when, and what will be accomplished. A document you will be asked for is your proof of tax-exempt status. Most grants are for nonprofit agencies or charitable organizations that have a letter from the IRS stating the agency is tax-exempt under Section 501(c)(3) of the Internal Revenue Code. Churches and religious organizations may also qualify for exemption. The executive director or a board member should be able to give a copy of the letter. If you cannot find it, contact the IRS to get a copy. This is a sample of what the IRS 501(c)(3) letter may look like. Notice in the top left, it clearly shows it is from the IRS. Some letters may have this logo, and others may just have the IRS address without a logo. In the first paragraph, it mentions 501(c)(3) determination. Normally in the top right section, the letter will list the agency's EIN, Employer Identification Number, or Federal Tax Identification Number, which is usually needed for state and federal grant applications. Most funders will require a list of the current members who are serving on the agency's board of directors. At a minimum, the list should include the names of each of the board members, their position on the board, if they have one, and the subcommittee they serve on, such as finance, fundraising, or governance. It is not common, but some foundations may want the year each board member joined the board, their home or work address, and their contact information. Here is an example of the ABC Incorporated Board of Directors. A funder will want to see if you have a healthy and strong group of members who are actively participating on the board and on a subcommittee. Notice I am listing the roles of President, Vice President, Treasurer, and Secretary. Those are the 4 officer positions that show a board is healthy and well run. I have 10 board members with 4 on the Finance Committee, 3 on fundraising, and 3 on governance. The agency's annual budget is usually developed by the board's finance committee, reviewed and revised by the board, and then formally approved by the full board of directors. The approval should be documented in the board's meeting minutes. The agency budget then serves as the goal for income and spending for the next program and fiscal year. Some agencies run on the calendar year of January to December, others run on July to June or October to September. This is a sample agency budget. Notice the income is listed at the top, followed by the expenses, and at the bottom it shows if there is a profit, a loss, or breaking even. Most funders expect to see agency budgets that do not show a profit. For funders, they will wonder, if you are showing a profit, why do you need our money? The finance director or executive director of the agency you are working for should be able to give you a copy of the currently approved agency budget. If your agency has several programs that all need grant funding, you want to have a budget ready to go for each of them. Ideally, the finance director for the agency should be able to pull a profit and loss report for the program for last year, which will serve as a draft budget for the next year. But if nothing is available, figure out what the income and expenses were for last year for each program, and then make any needed revisions for expenses such as expanding or downsizing, and make a realistic guess for income. This is a sample program budget for the higher program. As you can see, it is heavily funded by federal and state grants. There are also some corporate and individual donations that support the program each year. Did you see that the program creates its own income by charging a program fee? The funder would see there is a high payroll expense and would probably expect to see a full list of staff members that support the program. And notice the net income at the bottom is zero. Most funders want to know they will not be the only ones supporting a project. They want to see that you've requested funds from other foundations and that you've received a commitment from them. They want to see that you have continued to ask for resources and are proactively working hard to keep the program going. This is called sustainability. Funders want to know, after our funding dries up, how will you sustain the program? How will you keep providing the services? This is an example of a list of other funding sources for the higher program. In the previous program budget slide, we saw that the annual budget for the higher program is over $500,000. Looking at this chart, a reviewer will see that we've been able to secure a lot of money already and are continuing to ask for funds. Also, a reviewer may see their competitor, another bank supporting the program, which may create some healthy competition between funders. Some funders may ask for the agency or program brochure. Since brochures can take up a lot of time to put together, it is wise to already have a PDF version that you can easily upload or print and enclose in a mailed application. If you do not have an agency or program brochure and the funder requests one, definitely take the time to create a brochure. You can even ask a high school student to put one together, and it may count towards his or her community service project. Here is an example of a front and back tri-fold brochure for ABC Incorporated that explains all three programs. Ideally, you do not want to have anything on the brochure that will continually change, like the total number of clients who have been served each month or year, since those numbers will keep changing. Or if you have a program that has high turnover in staff, it's best not to list the staff members' names. List the main contact phone number, email, website, physical address, and information about the programs. The next few slides are items that may possibly be requested but are not common for local grant applications. When an agency goes through an annual audit, the firm providing the audit will normally produce several documents. One of the documents is the financial statement. Sometimes there is a lengthy version with many pages and a brief version with less pages. You want a copy of the brief version for your funders. Keep copies of the most recent and the prior year financial statements. The Board of Directors is responsible for 3 to 5 year future planning for the agency. Together with input from staff, community members, and stakeholders, the board members create the agency's strategic plan. The strategic plan gives the blueprint of where the agency is going. It assesses the agency's relationship with the community, strengths, areas for improvement, lists various goals and objectives, ideal completion dates, and who is responsible. It should be a supporting and evolving document. A less common request is for the agency's Articles of Incorporation, also known as the Certificate of Incorporation or a corporate charter. What the funder is asking for is a copy of the legal document that was filed with the Secretary of State to create the agency. If you cannot track down a copy of that document, you may be able to go on the state website and pay for a copy. This would be a document you want to have ready for when you start going after larger grants. Now we will transition into which grants you can go after and begin creating your development plan. The first thing I want you to do is create an Excel document where you will list the names of all of the local banks and credit unions in your area. For now, we will keep the list to local funders versus large banks, since the local funders are more interested in supporting local causes. By keeping it local, I want you to increase your chances of getting an award and boost your confidence as a grant writer. The next thing to do is add all local chambers of commerce to your list. Add the names of any large businesses that are in your area. Add the names of any temples, churches, synagogues, and mosques. And add the names of any local philanthropic groups such as Lions Clubs, Rotary Clubs, United Way, and women's organizations. Some regions have agencies that provide administrative support to several private foundations, and they give out grants. Add any of those agencies to your list. The next time-consuming task will be to search for and visit and study the websites for each business you listed. The words you are looking for on the websites are foundation, giving guidelines, gifts, and community involvement. If you find the word foundation on their website, that will then bring you to another page where you need to look for the types of local causes they will support. On their foundation page is where you will find the RFP and see if it will be a paper or online application. Once you've located the RFP or link to the online application, you want to look for a few more things. Do you think they would support your mission? Is the service you provide one of their focuses? If yes, the next thing to look for is their due date or due dates. Some banks give grants twice a year or quarterly. In your Excel spreadsheet, jot down when each foundation's grants are due. Ideally, the due date should be in its own column so you will be able to sort your list to help you prioritize your efforts. As you are on each of the Foundation's websites and find their funding priorities, if they clearly would not be interested in your project, don't delete their name from your spreadsheet. Instead, color-code it for businesses you will not approach. That will save you from second-guessing yourself and restudying their website later. You also want to look for how much they have given other agencies in the past, if they've funded similar projects, and make a note for yourself of how much you could ask for. For my sample development plan, I've listed the funders' names, websites, due dates, and how much I could potentially ask for. I grayed out one funder because it wasn't a good match. I set up a filter at the top so I can easily sort or filter to find what I'm looking for later. In Excel, if you highlight the header row, click on Data, then click on the Filter button, it will add filters at the top of each column. It's easy to take off too. Just highlight the row again and unclick the Filter button. You've found a grant that looks like a good match between what the funder wants to support and what you can provide with your program or project. Now what? The next set of slides will be a review of what you've already learned. Remember two things. The RFP provides the language and structure of the grant, and the funder's priorities is what you need to repeat back in your application. When you explain the work your agency will do, you are demonstrating how your work fits in with their priorities. Many funders now provide a brief online test to determine if your agency is eligible to apply for funding. If you pass the test, the system will connect you to their application portal where you will need to register and start the application. The questions may ask if the agency is a 501c3 organization. Does it provide services in a specific city, state, or region? And it may ask if the agency is requesting funds to provide certain activities that are not allowed. If you answer the questions incorrectly, you may get booted out of their system. But if you know your agency should be eligible, try getting back in and pay close attention to how you are answering the questions. Some of the questions may be written in a way that is easy to misunderstand. Usually the systems are open, so you won't get blocked if you try getting in a second or third time. Once you get in, jot down any username or password you create, since you will go in and out of the system several times. It's really exciting when you find a grant that is a good match, but before you start writing, slow down for a second and think, what is your strategy for time management, prioritizing, and planning? It's important to find out what to work on first, have a game plan for next steps, and know how you will meet the deadline. Since I already knew the needs for each of the programs, I did not lose any time planning what I would do with the money. The first thing I would work on was the budget, since that seemed to take up more time. If you were recently hired as the grant writer, well before you start working on any grants, you want to be very familiar with each of the programs. Seeing the program firsthand and meeting with staff would be ideal. In addition to knowing the history of the programs and the accomplishments, you also want to know all of the services that are provided, what goals are easily met, and what obstacles staff deal with to provide those services. This learning period can really slow you down if not done before you start writing grants. As a reminder, your application needs to first convey that there is a problem and then explain the who, what, where, when, how, and why. Who is affected? What is the actual problem? Where geographically is a problem? When, as in how recently? How? What factors contributed to the problem? And why? Why is it something that needs to be addressed? And why should they fund your program or project? The problem needs to be a cause the funder wants to support, and it can't be too overwhelming or hopeless. When stating the problem, you don't want to give your opinion. You want to gather statistics from a reliable source, such as census data or a recent article from a local newspaper, or statistics your agency has gathered proving it's a local problem. For example, if you were writing a grant to provide food to poor communities in your region, you would want to quote the rates of poverty in your region. You would not give statistics about poverty in another state or country. Once you've stated the problem, you then need to write about the services you will provide to fix the problem. Will you increase children's reading abilities? Will you decrease food instability? In measurable terms, what will you do? Which of these two phrases is stronger? Each year the higher program decreases tardiness and truancy by 95%, or each year the higher program decreases tardiness and truancy. Notice how adding the percentage lets the funder know you've been tracking your success and will reach your goals. While it is tempting to promise the moon and the stars, or say you will juggle on top of an elephant that is balancing on a ball that is on top of a tightrope, don't do it. Stick to what the agency is good at. Stay true to the mission. Write goals that are realistic and that the staff will easily be able to meet and hopefully exceed. Remember, you never want to overpromise, you want to overdeliver. Also, what will be the cost to provide those services? How much are you asking this particular funder to contribute? Most applications have limited space, but if they allow for more information, the other concept you want to keep in mind is why your agency? What makes your agency the expert in providing the needed services, and how do you write it? An easy way to answer that is look at what your agency has done in the past that proves the services are effective. Make sure you already have it written how you will list past successes in measurable terms, such as total clients served or an increase or decrease by a specific percent. This tip is very important. Ideally, you've planned your time well so the grant is written and you still have a few days until it is due. At this point, you want to put everything aside and stop looking at it. The next day, look at it with fresh eyes or try to see your application from the reviewer's perspective. Look to see if you missed anything. Proofread every detail to make sure everything makes sense and is grammatically correct. You can even have someone else look at the grant before you give it to the authorized representative. The final step is to have the authorized representative sign the forms. Then you want to scan the entire document and save it for your records. Upload the application and save the confirmation that it was received, or send the printed packet in the mail as certified mail. As you finish, you can think you will always remember what you wrote, but as you move on to other grants and the months pass, you can easily forget what was promised. So make sure you keep a copy of the application before you send it. Let's fast forward to the future. We're at a point where you have submitted several grants, but how are you tracking them? Here is a sample applications spreadsheet. As you write the grants, you need to track the date you applied, who you applied to, which program will be supported, what you applied for as a brief description, how much you requested, and has the grant been awarded or not. It's also important to track the date the grant is awarded and the date you received the funds to help organize grant years for the auditors. Notice I built the application spreadsheet with filters in the top row so it immediately becomes a useful tool for me. Imagine this is a list of 20 grants. If someone asks me what grants I applied for during a certain period, I can sort by the date applied in the far left column and get that information quickly. If I'm applying for another grant to support the higher program, I can filter for just that program and have a quick list of all the grants awarded or pending, and that can serve as my other sources of funding list. Now let's imagine you've submitted several applications and you receive an exciting email that you got a grant. So why do I have a picture of a lifeguard chair? Because when a grant is awarded, as the grant writer, you become the lifeguard or protector of that grant. Your name and reputation is now attached to the program's success or failure. Immediately, you want to review the application that was submitted, know what was promised and what is expected, and make sure everyone knows their role. Anyone who will be implementing the program or services needs to perform the work according to the timeline or start date that was submitted in the original application. Funds need to be used solely for the purposes outlined in the grant application. People who are unfamiliar with grants tend to think grants are free money and can be used whatever way the agency needs. Remember, you are the lifeguard and you need to make sure the funds are used exactly as stated in the original application. Some funders may want a signed contract as a commitment before you can receive the funds, and as discussed earlier, if you have any trouble implementing the program or services, you need to notify the funder. The funder wants the agency to succeed at providing the services. They are interested in your progress and understand obstacles agencies face. They can provide support or resources and, if needed, can help you revise the original plan that was submitted. Remember, we discussed that a grant is a relationship. Once an award is made, it is important to find out from the funder how they will be informing the community of the support they have given your agency. They may be sending out a press release, or they may post it on their social media. Make sure they lead the process of informing the general public and follow their lead. Always acknowledge and thank your funders whenever you can in your newsletters and on your agency's social media. Once you have created your system for writing and tracking grants and your skill set increases, you will understand the path to getting more funding and gradually want to tackle larger and more involved grants. Usually the size of the financial award will help predict how much juggling, coordinating with other agencies, and stress you will experience in writing the grant. Local grants are usually easy. State grants can be more difficult, and federal grants can be extremely stressful but exciting and inspiring when awarded. As your success rate at getting grants goes up, you may want to adjust your hourly fee. To learn what the going rate is in your area, you can ask other grant writers, or you can look at current grant writer job openings in your state to see what salary ranges are listed. The beauty with grant writing is it can be done on a part-time or full-time basis depending on the needs of the agency. If it is your business, you can decide how many clients you want and how much work you want to do. This is a list of the common words you will find in the grant writing industry for basic applications. And now I can say congratulations to you because you have learned the grant writing language for local grants. We have learned what each of these words means, how it relates to the funder, and how it is involved in creating a complete grant application. If you decide you are up for the challenge and progress to writing state and federal grants, you will learn many other words in the process. We learned what a grant is, the importance of building a strong relationship with funders, where and how to find grants, who is eligible, how long it takes to write a grant, what a typical life cycle of a grant is, and how long to hear back if the proposal is awarded or not. We reviewed the skills needed to be a good grant writer, the philosophy of writing grants, such as the 3 main questions, the balancing act of how to answer those questions, and the concept of writing with the hope of exceeding goals. We also reviewed what to expect before, during, and after a grant is submitted, what to do and not do, and common pitfalls and shortcuts to save time. You now know what items need to be readily available as digital copies, how to create your development plan for which grants you will go after, priority items to work on first in the RFP, how to create your application spreadsheet, your role as the lifeguard of the grants, and how to keep building your relationship with funders and continue to receive grant awards. Now you have all the tools you need to understand, review, write, and manage grants. The experience of seeing grants you have written and secured become a reality, and the success you witness with the programs being implemented will continually increase your confidence and writing abilities. Thank you for participating. I hope you have enjoyed this webinar, and I wish you great success as a grant writer.